10 days ago, one of Donald Trump's co-defendants in the Georgia election interference case threw a bombshell at Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. Michael Roman, a former Trump campaign official, alleged in a filing without proof that DA Willis is involved in an improper romantic relationship with Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade, and that her office has paid Wade an exorbitant sum of money for his services, which he in turn has used to take Fani Willis on lavish vacations. All of this without proof, I reiterate. Because of this alleged conflict of interest, Mr. Roman is requesting that Wade, Willis, and her entire office be removed from the criminal case. Now, Michael Roman's filing referred to sealed court records in Mr. Wade's divorce proceedings. And now Fani Willis has been subpoenaed for a deposition in those proceedings. Today, a lawyer representing DA Willis filed a motion asking the judge to quash that subpoena, arguing that DA Willis has no relevant information to offer in this divorce matter, and adding the subpoena of District Attorney Willis is being sought in an attempt to harass and damage her professional reputation. Defendant, that would be Mr. Wade's ex-wife, has conspired with interested parties in the criminal election interference case, that would be Trump's co-defendants, to use the civil discovery process to annoy, embarrass, and oppress District Attorney Willis. Back with me here is Melissa Murray. Melissa, it feels like the messiness of Nathan Wade's divorce proceeding is a convenient tool for these Trump co-defendants to kind of get their claws in and say, oh, these untoward behaviors are cause for dismissal. What do you make of the timing here?
So this is basically the Real Housewives of Atlanta version of the Trump immunity argument. I mean, it's a distraction. It's meant to insert a new set of legal proceedings while we try and figure out whether Fani Willis has to disclose this or that, have a subpoena, whatever, and it delays the prospect of this Georgia indictment ever going to trial. That's the name of the game here. And to be very clear, I don't know what's going on between DA Willis and Nathan Wade, if anything, and none of us do, and there's been no proof offered here. But whatever is happening, it actually doesn't affect the strength of the charges against Donald Trump and any of the co-defendants that were named in that indictment. And no one can dispute that.
Yeah, just to that, the sort of central allegation that Fani Willis is ensured that her paramour gets paid this exorbitant sum of money that he then uses to take her on vacations. She has not denied they are in a relationship. She has said that he's gotten paid the same as everybody else in terms of an hourly fee. He's made more money overall because he's had more billable hours. But I do wonder, given the fact that she may be romantically involved with the prosecutor in her case, that the state is paying. Is that, I mean, if you're Judge Scott McAfee here, is this open and shut in her favor, or is there a potential avenue for a problem?
So, I mean, the optics are terrible if, in fact, there is a romantic relationship and he is billing some exorbitant amount of hours and profiting in some way from this. Like, this should be disclosed if they are, in fact, in a romantic relationship. And I think most people would say that to err on the side of caution, it would be better not to work with someone with whom you are in a romantic relationship on a matter that is as high profile as this one. But again, it doesn't undermine the charges that were brought against Donald Trump and his co-defendants. It's just messy. And maybe it's an ethical problem with regard to how the prosecutor's office is working, but it doesn't necessarily mean there are ethical problems with regard to the charges that they've brought. And I think, again, disaggregating those things is really important here. The optics are bad. It's going to be really tough sledding for Fani Willis going forward because of this, but not because of the strength of the charges she brought against them.
Right. There's going to be a hearing. Some of it's going to be televised. It is going to be messy. I mean, I was surprised to learn that if for whatever reason she is ordered to step down from this case, the entire office, her entire office goes with her. So
and
as you
new people have to come on and get onboarded, which means we're not having this trial until after the election, which means we may not have it at all.
Is it a foregone conclusion that new people will take it up, or is it an open question as to whether new prosecutors would take it up?
I'm presuming that there may be prosecutors who want to continue this. If there is an interim DA who takes this on and may want to continue it, but there may not be. So, I mean, that, too, is part of the tactic here. I mean, it's a really sort of go big or go home kind of tactic. You know, smear this woman, blow up her life, but also blow up this prosecution and maybe blow it up to the point that it doesn't come back.
Or at the very least, have a rock to hide under if Trump is convicted and he can say the whole thing was rigged. This is a crooked prosecutor. She was just using this to make money. I do have to ask, because the New York Times is reporting today that there has been very heated exchanges between Fani Willis's office and Trump's defense team. The New York Times is reporting that some of the attorneys have been addressing DA Willis and her prosecutors in ways she finds disrespectful. She has said to them via email, in the legal community and in the world at large, some people will never be able to respect African Americans and or women as their equals and counterparts. That is a burden you do not experience. What is your reaction to this exchange?
It's not surprising. I mean, I think, one way that we might understand the events of January 6th is not simply a riot in favor of Donald Trump and a quote unquote stolen election, but also a kind of revanchist assault on a changing model of leadership in this country. I mean, we had that happen on January 6th. A week later, we saw Nancy Pelosi as the first woman Speaker of the House sign the articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. And then a week after that, we saw Sonia Sotomayor, the first woman of color to serve on the United States Supreme Court, swear in Kamala Harris as the first woman and woman of color to serve as vice president. There's a changing model of leadership in this country, not just in government, but all over corporations, law firms, whatever. And there are some, I think, for whom that changing model is unfamiliar and perhaps a little threatening, and maybe they respond in kind. And there are those who are in those positions of leadership who feel those slights quite acutely.
Yeah, I will say that I was in Atlanta, Georgia on January 5th watching Raphael Warnock become elected as the first black senator from the state of Georgia, and then January 6th happened. I'm not saying it's causal, but the two are linked in terms of the decline of one group of individuals and the ascension of another.